Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted. I don't think we've ever had two people with the same name on the show, but we've done lots of three-handers, but we've never. So today I'm delighted to be joined by not one, but two Lindsays. Welcome to the show, Lindsays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's going to make it easier some ways, as I said, and more difficult in others. Let's we've got Lindsay R, who's a adopted mum, and we've got Lindsay. Sorry, I've forgotten yours.
H.
Yeah, Lindsay H, who works for the Heart Gallery.
Yes.
So Heart Gallery is we've had Laurie Sherman Graff on from the Heart Gallery in New York, and that was a great conversation. And I know that Heart Gallery people have a huge hearts. We only have people on the hearts. We only have people on the show with big hearts. But the Heart Gallery helped Lindsay H helped Lindsay R adopt, and Lindsay R has an incredible story around that. Now, we're not going to just dive into that a little bit, because then we're going to be talking about a couple of things. I think for me, one of the things that seems to be like gold dust, like a gold dust insight for adoptive parents and all parents and all people, right? But got absolute gold dust. And then we're going to look at advocacy, because Lindsay R has always been a parent. She is an educator, so she's uniquely placed to give us both sides of the coin on advocacy. So can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Perhaps we could start with Lindsay H, then we go to Lindsay R.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to share a little bit more about the Heart Gallery and our kids. So I have worked in the child welfare system since 2009, working with specifically with kids whose parents' rights are terminated and they were waiting for their forever family. So I joined the Heart Gallery of Tampa in 2014, and I'm now the executive director there. And our main goal and why we exist is really just to introduce our community to our kids. You know, there's so many people still that don't even know that there's children available for adoption in the foster care system, specifically older kids. So you'll never see like a healthy baby on the Heart Gallery. All of our kids are kids who need a little bit more help in finding a home. So we have teenagers, big sibling groups, kids with special needs, kids with medical needs, and we introduce them to the community in a really positive way and really highlight their strengths. So they're seen, you know, as a child and not necessarily a foster child. We have, you know, photos that are taken by professional photographers that we tour all through the community. And the idea is that, you know, you're walking through the mall or you're at the doctor's office and you see a photo of a child, and it just kind of plants the seed and introduces you to these kids. And, you know, while it may not happen tomorrow or next year, we've had families that will call us and say, you know, 4 years ago, I was shopping at the mall and I saw this photo of a child and I just can't get it out of my head. And now is the time that I'm ready to move forward to start the adoption process. So really, we met Lindsay because she adopted a couple of boys from the Heart Gallery we photographed them in 2020. It was right before the pandemic. And then from there, she just seems to be this amazing advocate and this amazing mom. And now all of a sudden she's got 6 kids and 4 Heart Gallery kids. So we're so excited to have her as part of our little Heart Gallery family.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So Lindsay R, 6 and are they all teenagers now, or some of them slightly older?
Nope, they're all teenagers.
They're all teenagers now. That's a huge thing that you've clearly undertaken. So which question to begin with, but maybe tell us a little bit about the story, and then we'll get into this gold dust learning that you've had.
Okay. So I've much like Lindsay been in the system since for me it was 2011. And my way through the system was in teaching. So I started teaching in high need schools, in the high need, what we call in the States, high schools, what I think you guys call secondary schools.
Yeah.
And just, I've been teaching forever, 10 years now, 11 years. And probably about 2 years ago, right before the pandemic hit, almost 3 years ago now, I don't know what it was, but I was just like, I could be a mom. And I could be a mom to teenagers, because that's what I was good at. Like I knew I could make those relationships work. I knew I could have that happen. And as a single person, I knew I could have that happen. So started the classes, did all the things that the foster care system has you do, background checks and interviews, all that fun stuff. And then the pandemic hit. And so I got to do half of it in person, half of it online. And then that summer of the pandemic, like Lindsay said, my boys moved in. And when my boys moved in, they were 13 and 14. They were bio brothers. I got into the system to help teens and sibling groups. That was my goal. And with no goal of adoption, that was never even on my mind. And the boys had been there about 2 months, and their caseworker called me and said, hey, we have a family who's interested, because like Lindsay said, they were part of the Heart Gallery. So many people that had access to their pictures and their story. And my immediate reaction to the caseworker was like, you're not taking these boys out of my house. And she's like, well, does that mean you're going to adopt them? And I was like, if that's what we got to do, then you're not taking these boys out of my house. And so that adoption process, I think, lasted 4 months. Like it was not long, because my boys, their biological mother had passed away. The dad had signed his rights over. Like it was a very easy adoption. And ever since then, it just kind of snowballed. Like I just kept taking in teens. I don't know that I've ever said no, until I got to 6, and then I was like, all right, we need to slow down. And so we have, but like she said, I just had an adoption go through another Heart Gallery kid about 3 weeks ago. And I have a 4th Heart Gallery kid in my house, and him and I just talked about it. And we are going to move forward with the adoption. It just takes 90 days before we can start that paperwork because of just like stay laws in our state. But yeah, so 5 of them have been through the foster care system. One of them was actually an ex-student of mine who just has a very tragic story. And I've since adopted her as well. Yeah, so just something I always knew I could do.
Yeah. And you shared, I mean, you shared something of the tragic story and the trauma that these teens have gone through last time.
Yep.
And was one of the parents murdered, if I remember right? Was that?
Yep. So my student, actually, the one that I adopted, her mom was murdered by her biological father. When my student was 15, 16, like she was fairly old, like she knew what was going on, I guess is my point. And then a stepdad took her in, and the stepdad kicked her out the day she graduated. And that's how I ended up with her. And she wanted a place to call forever. And technically at that point it was called an adult adoption because she was 18, even though she had just graduated. So it was like a very simple like filing fee, and now I'm on her birth certificate kind of thing. So
yeah.
And I think that that's such an interesting point that Lindsay brings up. So like I said, the majority of the kids in the Heart Gallery are teenagers. So we get a lot questions. Well, he's 17, he's only going to need a parent for another year, or once he, and the difference, well, twofold. One, our kids are generally delayed because they haven't had that consistent upbringing. They've switched schools 12 times in 12 years. They haven't had a stable placement. So they haven't learned how to function on their own the second they turn 18. And on top of that, you always need a parent, that you need somewhere to go for holidays. You need someone to walk you down the aisle when you get married. You need somewhere to go if you're having a tough time. I mean, I'm
Right.
40 and I talk to my mom every single day. Like that never, parenting doesn't stop at 18 is my point.
Right.
And so we've had kids that were adopted on their 18th birthday, actually. And it was just, those are the biggest wins, because now we know that that child is set up for, to have the support for the rest of his life, where he would have been homeless had he not been adopted that day.
Yep. And I actually had, so the adoption that just went through, she turns 18 next month. And that was one of her biggest fears, was aging out in the system. And she is by no means right. She hasn't even graduated high school. Like, she got another year of high school left. And so she by no means is ready. And neither was my 19-year-old who graduated. She called me yesterday about some fraud application that they wanted her to fill out or whatever. And so, yeah, I agree with Lindsay wholeheartedly that at 18, it's not like a steadfast, everybody's ready.
Yeah. So the gold dust that you sprinkled on our last conversation was this realization that you'd had, Lindsay, that not to take the kids' trauma personally.
Right.
So to me, that's like something that sounds really easy, really, really logical, and almost like impossible in the same. It sounds like, well, yeah, I mean, the difference between theory and practice is that
right.
There's no difference, that there is a difference between theory and practice, right?
Right.
Yeah. So how did you come to that? How did you first come to that realization?
Sure. So my like I told you, my two bio brothers, not my bio brothers, but they were bio brothers, had moved in, and my youngest son had been diagnosed with before he came to me, had been diagnosed with ADHD and anger issues, and so much so that he was on meds for both. And my youngest son would get and I'd seen it, my youngest son would get so mad that he would black out and start punching things and crying, and it was crazy. And I've only seen it twice, but it's intense. And so I remember one time we're in the middle of the adoption process, because it takes 4 months, and in our state, in the state of Florida, you need if a kid is over the age of 13 or 12, they have to consent to their adoption. So they have to sign the paperwork that says that they are okay with being adopted. And we had just done that, like within a week. And it's after school, and I had asked him to do, his name's Diego, and I had asked him to do something, who knows, take the trash out, do the dishes, something random to that effect. And he wanted to play video games. And I was like, no, I need you to do this first. And he did not want to do that. Excuse me. Diego is very much, I'm going to do what I want to do when I want to do it. I need a timeline. You're not going to mess up the timeline. Like, that's not how this works. So he was not having it. Mind you, I had worked all day, obviously. Like, he had been at school all day. I had worked all day. We were both in this heightened sense of we wanted to relax, but other things needed to get done first. And so we got into that argument of, no, you're going to do it now, blah, 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 whatever. And it escalated. It went all the way up. And Diego said something that got to me, and it was, well, what are you going to do? Unadopt me? And he said that, and it clicked. And I was like, I got to back away from the situation. So I was like, okay. I was like, nope, not going to happen. And he ran upstairs to his room, and I ran outside crying. He didn't see it, but I was crying, and I called my boss, actually, my principal, because she thinks very like her, and I think very similarly. And my principal said, it's a manipulation tool. It's not about you. He wants to see how hard he can push you, because everyone in his life has left, and he thinks you're going to leave too. Because at that point, it had only been 2-3 months. Like, he'd only lived with me not very long. and so he's going to do whatever he can do to push you away, because if he pushes you away, then it hurts less, because if he connects and then you push him away, it'll hurt more. So you have to realize that it's not about you. And I think that's what she said. And so now every time him and I get into an argument, and not so much anymore, but every time we got into an argument after that, it was, okay, this is not about you. Like, just, it's not about you. And it's hard, because all you want to do is argue when the kid is arguing with you, because you're mad, he's mad. It's easier to yell. But if I can remind myself that it's not about me, and I can walk away or come back or whatever, it's worked. And he is no longer on any of those meds. I've not seen him black out since taking him off the meds. He doesn't get in fights at school, which was one of the things they warned me about, that he was always getting suspended for being in fights. He does what I ask. He asks me when he wants to do something. He still fights with his brother and his sisters in the house and whatever, like, he's a teenager. But yeah, it's just continually reminding myself it's not about me. It's about whatever else is going on. So
is there a sense that or does the sense that the trauma was so bad and the diagnosis and the meds and stuff were so prevalent actually serve as scaffolding for that belief that it's not about you? Does it? It's like this is so bad, it can't possibly about me. It's all about what's in the past. It's nothing to do with me.
No, actually. So I wasn't the one who put him on meds. The foster care system, he was in a group home before he came to me. And so I think, honestly, for them, the meds were about a subdue situation. Like, they were trying to get him to almost like I hate to say it, but almost like a tranquilizer. Like, they were getting it so that he couldn't get to that point, because the meds wouldn't, like, allow him to. Whereas I think for me, the whole, it's not about me, and just like staying present. I think with Diego, it has been my biggest win, has been staying present, and showing up even when he's mad, even when he's yelling at me, even when he's pissed off. I think that has helped him. His trauma response was just to push people away. And I had a therapist tell me that, like a personal therapist, but then also, like, we had a adoption therapist too. And it was very interesting. And he would say, like, you're not my real mom. Like, I've been yelled at Diego's really the only one that's ever hit me with that, but like, a couple of times. But now I don't get it anymore. And I think it was because, again, he was just trying to push me away. And I think for him, having a female in his life that has stayed has been weird, because he's not used to that. And not for his mom, not any fault of hers. Like, she had cancer. And then for his aunt, and then, for whatever. But yeah, maybe it was scaffolding in the sense that, like, it can't be about me. He's only lived here for 3 months, but he loved to make it personal. Diego was very good at pushing the personal buttons. And whether the response was about me or not, he tried to make it about me, because his goal was to make me so mad that I would push him out. And so I guess that's kind of where that realization came in. And it was like, he's saying this about me, but it's not about me. Yeah. It's about everyone else that's left before me.
Was there, had you heard that phrase from somebody else beforehand, or
No, it was my boss. My boss said it, and I was like, oh shit, she might be right. And then I brought it up in therapy, like a personal therapist, and she was like, no, that's genius, that's gold. Yeah, like, she's right.
Yeah, and I think that, a lot of our kids, it is very like a defense mechanism. So we even have these events where, kids who are available for adoption will come and meet prospective families at a park or zoo or something like that. And all of the teenagers, they'll either take their name tag off, or they won't talk to anyone. Because at the end of the day, these families write down on a card, oh, I'm interested in Johnny, I'm interested in Melissa, and the teenagers can say, well, no one wrote my name down because they didn't know my name because I took my name tag off, or no one wrote my name down because I didn't talk to anyone. It's not because they didn't want me. It's because it's very much a defense mechanism, and they just try to protect themselves in that way. Like, and then you will see, like how Lindsay mentioned, when they finally are in this safe environment and they feel safe, that's when their feelings start to really come out, and they're working through their trauma because they're finally in a safe space to be able to start working through some of that stuff.
Yeah. It's as you say, it's defensive. It's like, I'll get my defense in first.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get my defense in first by actually going on the attack.
Yeah, my daughter, the one that the finalization just came through. She's been in the foster care system the longest of any of the kids that I've had. And for her, it got very interesting because the closer we got to adoption, like anytime I gave her any kind of news on, oh, like this got submitted, or we went to this court date or whatever, she would act out. And her way of acting out is through drugs mostly. And because that's how she deals with her anxiety and depression and PTSD and all that stuff. And so I kind of, not that I stopped telling her, but I would tell her I don't know, I learned to do it in different ways. Like I would do it at lunch while we were eating, whatever, and something that was just between me and her. And then I would ask her like how she's feeling about this and whatever. And, but I didn't realize that it was like the first time it happened, I didn't realize that's why it happened. Like I didn't connect the two. Because I guess she had been through the process before, and then at the very end they backed out. So she was just so used to people, like she was like, well, I've been here, you're gonna back out anyway, so whatever. It's very interesting, the walls that these kids have built and the ways they're trying not to get hurt. I mean, you can't blame them, but it's very interesting. And even at 15, 16, 17 years old, I mean, Diego was 13 at the time, like for them to have advanced systems of this defense it's admirable, honestly, like good for them. But
yeah, there's you said that you're experiencing this high needs high school. Did you call it high needs?
We call them Title I, but yeah, same idea.
You said that had been the reason that you decided that you wanted to adopt teens, because you have that understanding of what's going on for teens. So I guess that perhaps is part of the scaffolding of you seeing this insight. Or so sure. If you put that part of the jigsaw to then when the principal said, well, this is not about you, you put those two things together, and the real, the penny drops, as we say. We have the penny drops, we have the insight, the aha moment, the epiphany, if you come in at it from a religious perspective. So what would you say to an adoptive parent that's listening, who's got teens that are whose trauma, exhibiting signs of their trauma, and they're struggling to see that it's not personal? What would you say to them?
So for me, I think the biggest thing has been treating, I think a lot of times when we have adoptive teens who are known to come from trauma, we blame everything on that, right? We say, okay, well, he had a traumatic experience or she had a traumatic experience, when sometimes it's just they're being teenagers. Teenagers are buttheads. Like that's very real. And they're sullen and they're whatever, like the teenager mood, right? So I think a lot of that comes from understanding teenage development, understanding that like sleeping till 12 o'clock is normal, or getting mad because you are sucking their teeth and rolling their eyes because you told them to do their homework. Like all of that is normal. It has nothing to do with trauma and everything to do with you're 15. But then when it does come to the trauma, because trust me, I see things that a lot of parents obviously have not, like bio parents, it's being able, you have to be very aware of yourself. And that's hard to do, because I think in society, especially in societies like ours, we learn that it's all about me, right? Like what the meritocracy idea of like being able to work to, if I do this, then I'm going to reach this goal, and it's what's best for me and whatever. And so you have to be very aware of your triggers. When Diego gets loud, that was a trigger for me. Come to find out, it was because my dad was one that got loud. So when my dad would get loud, so Diego kind of mirrored that for me. And so knowing that raised voice was a trigger for me, I would see it and I would say, okay, breathe, like, breathe in, breathe out, whatever. Woo-saw for, 5 seconds or whatever. And take a step back. So you have to be present, especially with kids with trauma. You have to show up, but you don't have to say anything. You can just be there, and let them lead the situation. So if a kid is really mad, and they're screaming and they're yelling and they're whatever, be in the room, but don't say anything. You don't want to agitate. And maybe like, okay, breathe. Like you could say that, but with Diego, he wants to scream and cuss and yell and hit a pillow and whatever. But eventually he comes down. Like eventually it takes some time, but he'll come down. And I think me sitting in the room with him presently, so like no phone, none of that, sitting in the room and just being there for him, and him realizing when he looked over after all of that and I'm still there, was big for us. And then just showing up in the small moments. So like the car ride to school, or using those moments to your advantage. Or, hey, you want to go to the store with me? Diego's learning how to drive right now. So like that's big leverage for me. He's trapped, he's driving, but then him and I can have those conversations. And just, yeah, I think for me, it's just being there. It's showing up, being aware of your own triggers, and then breathing through those triggers. And also understand, like being very forgiving of yourself. Like, have I yelled at Diego? Yeah, I yelled at him yesterday. Like it happens, right? Like you're going to yell. You're going to add to the situation sometimes when you probably shouldn't have. But that's okay too. Like we're both learning, and being okay with apologizing. I've said sorry to Diego a bunch of times. Like I shouldn't have got loud. I shouldn't have yelled. We should have done it this way, like whatever. I was raised in a house that was very, it's my way or the highway. Like my parents were very, you do this and you do it now, and if not, there's consequences. And I think I went then to raise my children that way and realized like that's not going to work. And it's become more of a partnership with my kids. Now, obviously, I'm still the authority figure. I still make the final decision. But I can be wrong, and that's okay. And that doesn't take away or diminish my authority. And I can also compromise, because if I teach kids those skills, then when they go into the world, then they're better people anyway. So it works. But yeah.
So people often, in the Western world, we're looking, so what do we do? And what essentially what you're saying is, I think, just sticking with it. I mean, it's consistent presence, it's persistence, it's patience, isn't it? I mean, you know, patience and just rolling with it. And like you said, you don't need to say anything. Like, so people saying, well, if this happens, what do I say? If that, well, you don't need to say anything.
Right. Just honestly, just being there. I think a lot of, especially when you adopt older children, and I'm sure Lindsay has seen this as well, like with older kids, that's most of the problem, is that someone hasn't been there consistently. And I know Lindsay can talk about the welfare system, and just how, like, I think I've seen like 6 case managers per kid, and they've been with me a year. Like it's insane. So consistency is not a thing in their life. So for you to just like consistently show up, and again, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know exactly what to do. but just to consistently show up in the big moments, but in the small moments as well, it does wonders for your relationship. It really does.
Yeah. So we talked about, I think you used the word, like showing up, being present. So what about this this advocacy thing? We've got to advocate for our kids and get them the support that they need. And I've talking to other people about this. One of the main things seems to be that persistence behind that. And I when I'm trying to get my way with a bureaucrat, I sum up my approach as politely persistent. Yeah. So they've got to realize that bureaucrat who is just doing the job within a cog within a small wheel has to realize that I'm not going anywhere. So that's my take on bureaucracy. Please, what it's an area that I know very little about, and it's I can the emotional stuff I kind of get to an extent, and I had lots of from my own experience and also from lots of the podcast interviews I've done with adoptive parents, but the advocacy stuff we've covered a lot less. But what are the big things that? Yeah. What have been the big insights that you've had in this advocacy?
So, and I've seen this a lot with kids who aren't in care, but just with kids in general, but also with kids in care. We tend to, and I have to imagine it's probably the same in the UK, we label kids, right? So we're like, this kid isn't a good test taker, this kid isn't good at math, or this kid he's a fighter, or he's a skipper, or whatever. So for my son, it was, he was a fighter. So my son had a reaction when kids got into his face, he was immediately fighting. And so the moment that happens, an AP, like an assistant principal or a dean or whoever sees that and then tends to put them in lower tracked classes where that happens, because apparently only general ed kids can get in fights. I don't know what the thought process is there, but that's what's happening. Or I have another kid in my house who was absent a lot. And a lot of times that's because she didn't have a ride, or because she missed the bus, or because whatever the reason was. And so because she was absent so much, then she obviously isn't qualified to take this higher level class or do this higher level thing. And so for me, it was realizing that the system was wrong, and you're not going to tell me what to do about my kid, and you're going to put them in the classes that I want you to put them in regardless. And so you might be a little nicer than me because I am not patiently persistent. I'm just persistent. And I'm going to push until you do what I want. And then once we're done, we're good. I've learned that. So the education system, it's been a little easier for me because obviously I'm a teacher. So I know all the principals and assistant principals and guidance counselors in my kids' schools. And so I don't have to argue that very much. I also know the foster liaison for our county, like our district, and she and I are really good friends. And so it works in my favor. But for people that are not that savvy, there's absolutely no reason why a kid can't go to a class you think that they're ready for. And as a parent, you're the biggest advocate. If you can push, like you said, be politely persistent, it'll happen. But moving on to other things. So like with medical stuff, it's just, I just think a lot of people are trying to get through their job. Like you said, they're just a cog in a wheel. So they're trying to check the box so they can move to the next thing. And I'm not going to just be a box that you check. Like we're going to do this the right way. And we're going to do this the way this kid deserves until you make it happen. And you can't be afraid to make the call, right? So like, if the caseworker isn't doing what they're supposed to do, then I need the caseworker's boss's number. And if that guy's not doing what he needs to do, then I need that guy's boss's number. And if I got to call DCF in the state of Florida, that's what I'll do. Like we're going to keep going. And so the foster care system, they don't generally tell me no anymore because they know that I'm going to keep going. So I don't generally have problems anymore. But I think you have to be that squeaky wheel until they realize that you're not going to stop. Because our kids deserve that. Like, why wouldn't you? I hear a lot of foster parents, and not so much of little kids, because I think the resources for little kids are a lot more easy to lay out, like the daycare assistance and the food assistance and all that kind of stuff. But for older kids, like, a lot of people don't know that the state of Florida will pay for kids to get their driver's license, to the car insurance. All of that is there. You just have to sign up. The college stuff and the college tours and the Medicaid that our kids are on supplies like $150 a year per kid for them to do sports and activities, or for them to go to homecoming, or for them to go to prom, or like whatever. But until someone tells you that, you don't know that that exists. And so I just like consistently ask all the questions. And then, having 6 of them, it's nice because all 6 of them have different case managers and different groups of people around them. And generally what works for one kid, all of them get that benefit, just no one's told me that before. So like all my kids they all got LA Fitness gym memberships this year, and Medicaid paid for all of it. And they're loving it because there was a care grant that I could get, and that was how that worked. There are a couple adoption grants through the foster care system that, like, the boys had Busch Gardens passes, which is an amusement park that they paid for. But had I not asked, nobody would have known. You know what I mean? Like, Lindsay's program right now is paying for my son to take opera lessons because he wants to be an opera singer. And he is loving it. I'm trying to think what else. It just, you have to ask and you have to be willing. One of my daughters is getting braces through the Guardian Ad Litem program. They usually only do them for younger kids, and she's 17 but really wants them, and so they're paying for it. But had I just sat down and been like, okay, well, they didn't say I get this, so I must not.
Yeah.
I would have never known. And so you gotta ask. And I mean, the worst thing you can do is say no. They're like, no, we don't do that. Then it's like, okay, I'll ask somebody else. And that's fine. So,
yeah. So interesting wealth of stuff there. I guess you it seems like you're picking this stuff up all the time from all the conversations that you had, from all the contacts that you're making. Yeah. And so there's a research task for adoptive parents to do. There's an asking task for them to do, and there's and it's all coming from different sources. So,
and I think the big thing for adoptive parents is that a lot of people seem to think, and I don't know if this is how it works for you guys, but I know not in the States, that once they're adopted, it's done. Like, they're yours now. Now you go to your home and you live happily ever after. And that's just not the case. So many people are there for post-adoption. Like, there's so much post-adoption support. So just because your kid is adopted or they are now legally yours doesn't mean that you stop asking. Like, keep asking all those questions, because there's people that are helping and willing to do those things.
So. We have an agency locally, and that's all they do. It's just post-adoption therapy. And, obviously there's all of these behaviors and traumas that they're working through prior to finalization. But then once it's finalized, it kind of opens up this new idea of, okay, it's a new chapter. Now, how do we move forward? And so there's, this agency that's solely focused on just post-adoption support, and there's support groups and therapies and things like that are available.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how we got our post-adoption therapist, was through that agency.
Yeah. What's the agency called down in Tampa?
Camelot Adoptions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think, is it Mike, the boss of Camelot? Is he called Mike?
Yes.
The exec director?
Yes.
Somebody mentioned his name the other day.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to be coming on the podcast, hopefully. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Mike DeBrisi.
Cool. So listeners, there you are. There's. What I'm trying to do was to come up with a practical. What do you do next? So you could contact. Google post adoption support Florida, or post adoption support the county name, or your city name, or your town name, whatever, and get on their website, get on the phone to them and find out what options there are available, asking them big open questions, because we don't know what we don't know, so we've got to ask them a large open question rather than trying to because they're going to tell us stuff that we don't know about. Yeah.
And I think the best way to do that, I mean, ask those questions, yes, but I think like those support groups are probably the best way to do it, because other parents who are doing this are usually your best go-to. So like if one of these Camelot has like a parent support group, and so I've been a couple times, and not so much for the support group itself, but just to meet other parents who are adopting teenagers, and just to ask questions like, hey, have you heard of this? Or hey, my kid wants to do this, do you know anything about this? Because I think we are our own best resource, like meeting, going out to each other and helping each other.
Yeah. The other thing that you're talking about a lot, I think, was escalating it. So if you're not getting answers, then go over the head to their boss and keep on going that. And I don't know, we've all got different levels of patience in this matter. So I think be aware of, do I sometimes I let things go too long. My gut feel has told me I need to go over somebody's head. I've recently been going through a problem with electricity, and it's a long, boring problem. But in the old me would have tried to solve it with one person or one organization. But what I actually did, I've had three simultaneous, or three or four. So I was talking to my old supplier, I was talking to the ombudsman, I was talking to the new supplier, and I was talking to this was all email actually, and I was also engaging with the liquidator, because the first organization had gone bankrupt, right? So rather than waiting for one of those organizations to sort out for me, I was pursuing all 4 or 5 options at the same time, whereas old Simon 5 years ago would have done them one at a time. But I was actually going for it all in one go, and like this is just keep on at them and keep on at them.
When my son, my newest son, I don't even know how that works, but anyway, my son, he wanted these opera lessons, right? Like he really wants to sing. He's always been a musically talented kid. He's in a school where he plays an instrument. He plays a couple of them actually. He's very good. And I was like, I don't know anything about opera singing. So I, reached out to our local entertainment center, like theater center or whatever, and they had them, but it's not cheap. It's rather expensive. And so I did the same thing. I reached out to the Heart Gallery. I reached out to, he's got a guardian ad litem, so I reached out to their program. I reached out to his caseworker, and between the 3 of them, they've paid off his lessons for the summer. And I didn't have to pay a dime, but had I not talked to all 3 of them at the same time, I don't know that it would have happened, and I would have had to pay at least for one of the lessons, if not a couple, just to get it situated. So it's been very nice. And then I don't know if Lindsay's the one that found me the girl that sings, but now he's got his own personal person, so it'll be cool. But
so it's essentially about what we would call in the UK bloody mindedness, mixed in with a bit of creativity, and just keeping on going, and just persistence, and not taking no for an answer. Is there anything that you've gained, because obviously you're inside the system, you've been inside the system as a teacher since 2011, is there any particular things that you've shared at parent support groups that adoptive parents hadn't heard of before, or any kind of inside information that you've gathered that adoptive parents might not be aware of?
I think the biggest one just comes from like figuring out the why. So like let's say a teacher tells you no, or an assistant principal or whoever tells you no, figuring out why, because usually no is not the end answer. So for people that may not be in the education system, just being able to like, again, advocate for your kid, but also like pushing it. Because I think as parents, we take the educators as the end all be all, right? Like they know what's best. They're doing what's best. They're doing, and that's great. And I'm glad people think of us that way. We don't. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. Like sometimes we do what's easy, because it's easy. Like we are also human. And so being able to push for your kid in any manner, even if you think the person in front of you is smarter than you or knows more than you or whatever. And that might be true, they might, but you know your kid best, and you know what's going to work for that kid the best. And so just continuing to push, I think, is the biggest thing. I know our systems are a little different when it comes to education, but like when it comes to like SAT testing or ACT testing or passing the state exam or whatever, like a lot of parents are like, well, they have to do this or that won't happen. And I'm like, actually, there are like 12 other avenues you can take. And parents don't know that, because why would they? Like they took this one avenue and that was the avenue that made sense to them. And that was the avenue that the system told them they were supposed to take. And like my son, go ahead.
It's set up for the masses. The bureaucracy is set up for the masses, and it wants to put everybody through a cookie cutter system, and they will not let you know about the other stuff because they want everything to be funneled down the mainstream channel. So then it becomes about the questions that you ask to find out different ways to, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? So there's different ways around the system. So big questions, getting insights from other adoptive parents through the parent support groups. Maybe if you've got a teacher that's a friend, you could ask their advice on trying to get that inside line on the system and going above their heads. And appreciating that they are working within the constraints of a bureaucracy.
Right. So and again, going back to, it's not about you. So like they don't need to take it personally either that you went above their head or whatever. It's not a negative thing. It's just, I need to do this for my kid. And so since you can't help me, I get it, but I got to move on.
Yeah. Brilliant. So are there any, I'm just conscious of time. Are there, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the adoptive parents that are listening?
Teenagers are the best. Adopt teenagers all day, every day. I understand that their rap sheets are longer, but it's just because they've been living longer. So they've done life a little longer than your babies or your 2-year-olds or your 5-year-olds. Teenagers are just big 5-year-olds. I'm gonna be 100% honest with you. They just really want a blanket and somebody to love them. So yeah, teens, and there's just so much more you could do. Like my teens are home right now while I'm in a hotel with a friend. You know, like they're awesome. They're cooking, they're cleaning, they're driving, they're doing all the things. It's just been a great experience, and I can't imagine it stopping soon. Brilliant.
Lindsay H., have you got anything else to add?
You know, I think that there's this fear that people have with adopting, especially from the foster care system. And we tell every family, you know, this is going to be the hardest thing that you will ever do, but it's also going to be the best thing you'll ever do. So, you know, when it's tough, just hang in there. And like Lindsay said, there's resources available. You just have to learn how to navigate those systems, but the kids deserve it.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Lindsay. It's been beautiful talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much to listeners. And as always, check out the guests, check out the show notes for links to the guests and find out more about what they're doing on their website and on their socials. And we will speak to you again very soon. Thanks a lot, listeners, and goodbye.